Have you ever been told, in words or in silence, that you don't belong right in the very place you work so hard to reach? That's exactly what happened to Elena Roberts, a black CEO who paid for first class, arrived on time, and followed every rule, only to be told her seat was no longer hers. As another passenger strolled past unchecked, Elena was asked to step aside, not because of her ticket, not because of a mistake, but because of something deeper, something too many of us have felt in offices, airports, and boardrooms alike. In that moment, Elena faced a choice: accept the humiliation quietly, or push back against a system that had erased her with a smile. What would you have done if it were you? Would you have walked away or stood your ground? This is not just a story about one flight. It's a story about dignity, about power, and about what happens when the quietest voice in the room decides not to stay silent anymore. Stay with us, like, share, and subscribe, because this is a story of how one call turned into a reckoning that shook an entire airline. The line for first class at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was short that afternoon. The low hum of rolling suitcases and the faint hiss of the espresso machine from a nearby cafe blended into the usual airport soundtrack. The overhead screen blinked. SkyConnect Airlines Flight 472, boarding first class. Elena Roberts adjusted the strap of her leather tote and took a steady breath. She was used to airports. In fact, her calendar looked like a map of connecting flights: Los Angeles on Monday, New York on Wednesday, London the week after. But today wasn't about travel as usual. Today she was headed to San Francisco for a private meeting with a group of clean energy investors who could expand her firm, Equinox Compliance Group, into international markets. She had booked her seat deliberately, 2A, a window seat in first class. No checked luggage, no hassle, just a chance to settle in, review her notes, and land ready for tomorrow's pitch. The boarding lane was nearly empty, just a middle-aged businessman in front of her scrolling on his phone, and a young man in cargo shorts and a baseball cap behind her balancing a paper cup of coffee. When Elena stepped forward and held out her boarding pass, the gate agent didn't greet her. He didn't even look her in the eye. His tone was clipped, flat, as if her presence in the first-class line had caused a disturbance. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your ticket again." Elena looked up, lips parted mid-thought. She had just been texting her assistant to confirm the hotel check-in when the voice cut through. She gave a polite smile, kept her tone calm. "Of course. Here you go." The man's badge read Ryan Miller. He glanced at her boarding pass longer than necessary, then finally said, "And your ID." Her eyebrow arched slightly, but she reached into her tote and handed over her driver's license. "Certainly." Ryan studied both documents with exaggerated care, as though he were searching for a hidden mistake. Elena stood there quietly, feeling the air thicken around her, behind her. The man in cargo shorts shifted impatiently. "Hey, is boarding open yet?" he asked. Ryan's entire tone changed. He smiled, bright and easy. "Absolutely, sir. Welcome aboard." He waved the man through without a glance at his ticket. Elena watched as the man disappeared down the jet bridge. She turned her eyes back to the gate agent. The contrast in tone warm for him. Cold for her echoed in her chest like an old, familiar bruise. Ryan finally returned her license and pass, but his mouth twisted slightly. "You're sure you're in the right line?" "Ma'am, this is priority boarding. First class, for a heartbeat." Elena simply blinked. The same disbelief she had felt countless times before rushed through her again. A dinner party in Boston where a partner's wife mistook her for the hired help. A boardroom in Houston where an investor asked if she truly understood the software she herself had designed. A cocktail reception in Chicago where a client said, "You're so articulate," with surprise that felt like a slap. She drew in a small breath. "Yes," she said calmly. "I'm aware. That's what my ticket says." Ryan looked at his screen, then back at her. He avoided her eyes now. "Looks like there's been a seat reassignment. I'll need you to step aside while I sort this out." Elena tilted her head, voice still measured. "Excuse me. That's not a reassignment. That's my seat. And you just let another passenger board with it?" Ryan gave her the kind of look reserved for someone causing a scene. He lowered his voice as if she were the problem. "Ma'am, please step aside so we can continue boarding." The wait-in area had grown quieter. People were watching, not loudly, not with raised voices, but with the silent curiosity of bystanders trying to decide whose side to take. Elena's chest tightened. She knew how quickly things could spiral when a black woman refused to comply. She had learned the art of containment years ago. Keep your voice calm, keep your tone low, do not give them the out they are looking for. So she stepped aside. Not because he was right, but because she understood the danger of doing otherwise. Her phone was still in her hand. She glanced at the screen, her thumb hovering over contacts, her thoughts racing. This was supposed to be simple. A seat, a flight, a quiet evening to prepare. But instead, here she was standing off to the side, ticket in hand, being told once again she didn't belong where she had already earned her place. The businessman who had boarded earlier glanced back from the jet bridge, then looked away quickly. A woman 2 rows over whispered to her husband. The air felt thick with judgment. Elena pressed her lips together and closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered her mother working double shifts just to pay her high school tuition. She remembered her first job after college, where she was mistaken for an intern twice in 1 week. She thought of all the small humiliations that had accumulated like stones in a jar she carried every day, but she also thought, not today, not like this. When she opened her eyes, her voice was steady. "Is there a supervisor I can speak to?" Ryan sighed, as though she had asked him to perform surgery. "I already told you, ma'am. There's nothing I can do." "I'm not asking what you can do," Elena said quietly. "I'm asking for your supervisor." There was a pause, then another employee emerged. A woman with light brown hair pulled into a bun, glasses perched on her nose. Her name tag read Karen Whitmore. Karen approached with a smile that was polite but empty. "Hi there. I understand there's a concern with your seat assignment." Elena nodded once. Her words were precise. "There's no concern. There's a mistake. I purchased seat 2A, confirmed my boarding pass at check-in, and just showed both my ID and ticket here at the gate. That seat was handed to another passenger without explanation." Karen turned to the monitor, fingers tapping. "Yes, I see your name here. Seat 2A, but it's been reassigned. Looks like a system change." Elena's voice sharpened, though it never rose. Without notifying me, Karen kept her tone even, rehearsed. "I'm afraid there's nothing available in first class anymore. We can offer you a premium economy seat and a travel voucher." For a second, Elena almost laughed. Not loud, just a short, cold exhale of disbelief. "A voucher," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am, for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. Elena tilted her head, her calm now edged with steel. You've just told a black woman in front of a dozen passengers that she doesn't belong where she clearly does. You handed her seat to someone else, and now you're offering her a coupon as if she came here for a grocery sale. Karen's smile faltered. Ryan pretended to study the screen again. The waiting area had gone silent. Every eye seemed to rest on Elena now. She inhaled deeply, the same breath she had taken in boardrooms, in meetings, in countless moments when dignity demanded containment. But this time, she knew. Silence would not be the end of this story. Elena remained at the counter, her boarding pass still firm in her hand. The overhead announcements droned on about flight departures and gate changes. But here at Gate C-27, the atmosphere was tight. Every second stretched as though the whole terminal had paused just to watch this single moment. Karen Whitmore's professional smile was meant to soften the blow, but it only sharpened Elena's sense of humiliation. The supervisor's lips curved politely, while her eyes stayed cool, distant, as though this problem were nothing more than a minor inconvenience she could smooth away with a few practiced words. "Ma'am, I assure you, this happens sometimes," Karen said, her voice soft but rehearsed. "Systems glitch. Seats get reassigned automatically. Nothing personal." Elena lowered her gaze for a moment, not because she believed the words, but because she had learned how to pause before responding. She'd spent her life perfecting that pause, the moment between insult and answer, between dismissal and dignity. She let her breath move through her chest, then met Karen's eyes again. "Nothing personal," she repeated slowly. "Yes," Karen said quickly, nodding as though to encourage agreement. "Nothing personal at all. We'll make sure you still get to San Francisco today. It will just be a slightly different seat." The silence between them thickened. Elena glanced at Ryan Miller, the gate agent, who was shifting uncomfortably behind the desk, still avoiding her gaze. His earlier sharpness had softened now that a supervisor had stepped in, but his unease only made the entire exchange feel more dishonest. Karen leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Look, I know it's frustrating. That's why we're prepared to offer a travel voucher. $200. You can use it on any future flight." Elena almost laughed again, the same short, disbelieving sound from minutes earlier. She shook her head slightly, her earrings catching the light. "A voucher," she said flatly. "That's what my dignity is worth today." Karen's practiced expression wavered, but she quickly recovered. "It's not about dignity, Ms. Roberts. It's just company policy." The name landed on Elena's ears like a stone. Ms. Roberts, detached, distant. She wondered how Karen would react if she knew exactly who she was speaking to, not just another passenger, not just another problem to shuffle aside, but the CEO of one of the most respected compliance firms in the country. A firm, SkyConnect Airlines itself, had hired 6 months ago to polish its diversity metrics, but Elena didn't say any of that. Not yet. Her phone buzzed lightly in her palm. She ignored it. Instead, she turned slightly toward the waiting area. Faces stared back, curious, uncertain, some sympathetic, some suspicious. A woman shook her head gently as her husband whispered something. A teenager scrolled through his phone while sneaking glances at her, as though wondering whether to record. Elena's shoulders straightened. She kept her voice steady, almost too calm. "You know what's really inconvenient? Ms. Whitmore. being told over and over that you don't belong, having to prove yourself again and again, in spaces where you've already paid the cost of admission. That's inconvenient. Karen's fingers tightened against the desk. Ryan Miller coughed softly, eyes fixed on the glowing screen in front of him. "Ma'am," Karen said after a beat, "if you'd like to take the premium economy seat, we'll need to finalize it soon. The flight is nearly ready to depart." Elena let the silence stretch. She thought of her assistant already waiting for her call in San Francisco. She thought of the investors expecting her presentation tomorrow morning. She thought of the clean, quiet window seat she had chosen on purpose, stolen away by a stranger who had walked through unquestioned. The ache in her chest was heavy but familiar. She knew this script. She had lived it before. And yet, standing here, she felt something shift. Not today. Her thumb brushed over her phone screen. She opened her contacts, hesitated, then locked the phone again. Not yet. Timing mattered. She looked back at Karen. "I'll wait," she said simply. Karen blinked. "Excuse me, I'll wait here while you figure out how this plays out," Elena repeated. Her tone was polite, but beneath it was iron. "But I'm not going anywhere." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Ryan shifted again, suddenly fascinated by the keyboard. The silence from the waiting area grew deeper, the kind of silence that carried weight. And then, a small thing happened so small it might have gone unnoticed if Elena hadn't been standing so still. A young black woman stepped away from a nearby gate, a water bottle in her hand. She walked quietly toward Elena, pressed the bottle into her palm, and gave a tiny nod. No words, no fuss, just a gesture of solidarity. Elena's throat tightened, her eyes flicking briefly toward the woman. She whispered, "Thank you," and the woman slipped back into the crowd. It was such a small act, but it steadied her. She set the bottle on her tote, crossed her ankles, and sat in one of the waiting chairs by the window. Her boarding pass was still in her hand, her phone still resting like a shield in her lap. The plane outside glinted in the afternoon sun, engines humming, a reminder of the seat that should have been hers. The gate crew returned to their rhythm, scanning tickets, welcoming passengers, pretending not to feel the silent tension at the counter. But for Elena Roberts, the humiliation had already transformed into something else. Not rage, not yet. Resolve. Elena sat by the wide glass window, the boarding pass warm in her hand. The plane outside shimmered in the Texas sun, its silver body reflecting streaks of light across the floor. Each reflection felt like a reminder of what she had purchased, what she had prepared for, and what had just been taken from her. The chatter of passengers filled the space again. Zippers, voices, boarding calls, but around Elena there was a bubble of silence. People still stole glances, then looked away quickly, embarrassed by their own curiosity. The message in their eyes was clear. This was not their fight. She leaned back slightly, drawing in a breath she had learned long ago, a steadying breath. The same breath she took in college when a professor assumed she was there on a sports scholarship. The same breath she took years later, standing at a corporate gala when a banker mistook her for the event staff. That breath was a kind of armor. It said, "Don't let them see the crack. Don't give them the story they want to tell about you." But sitting here, Elena felt the weight of it. How many times had she swallowed indignities just to keep moving forward? How many times had she smiled when she wanted to scream, stayed silent when she wanted to demand answers? Her phone buzzed again. A message from her assistant in San Francisco hotel confirmed. Car arranged. See you at the office tomorrow morning. Elena's thumb hovered over the screen. She almost typed a quick acknowledgement, but stopped. How could she explain that she might not even make the flight tonight? That she had been denied the seat she paid for, the seat she had chosen with care. A flicker of anger sparked inside her, but it wasn't the wild kind. It was measured, sharp, almost mathematical. She had built her entire career on reading systems, finding their flaws, exposing the gaps others tried to bury. And right now, she could see the system here at Gate C-27 with painful clarity. A black woman held to a higher standard. A white man waved through without question. A supervisor hiding behind policy while ignoring dignity. It wasn't new, but maybe, this time, it didn't have to end the way it always did. She looked at the faces around her, the curious, the indifferent, the quietly supportive. That young woman who had pressed the bottle of water into her hand, that tiny act of kindness. Elena lifted the bottle now, unscrewed the cap, and took a slow sip. The water was cool, grounding. She thought of her mother again, working 2 jobs just to make tuition. Her mother had always told her, pick your battles. Elena, you can't fight every insult, every slight. If you do, you'll lose yourself in the fight. Her mother's voice still rang true. But maybe the bigger lesson was one Elena had to teach herself some battles choose you. She closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she replayed the moment at the counter, Ryan's clipped tone, Karen's hollow smile. She heard the words again. Are you sure this is your ticket? She felt the sting of disbelief, the weight of being told she didn't belong. And beneath all of that, she felt something deeper exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of travel or work, but the exhaustion of carrying centuries of other people's assumptions, of being the one who had to prove, again and again, that she had earned her place. She thought of her company, Equinox Compliance Group, the hours she had poured into it, the nights building audit frameworks, the mornings presenting hard truths to executives who smiled while resisting change. She had fought so hard to make that firm a tool for accountability. And here she was, living the very story her company existed to dismantle. The irony almost made her laugh. Almost. Her phone rested in her lap, the screen dark now. She tapped it awake, scrolling through her contacts. Her finger paused over David Chen's name, Chief Legal Officer, trusted colleague. One of the few people who understood the fight wasn't just corporate, it was personal. Should she call him now? Should she unleash the machinery of Equinox against SkyConnect in real time? Elena's jaw tightened. She imagined what people would say if she did. She overreacted. She made it about race. She turned a travel mishap into a corporate war. She could already hear the critics, the dismissive voices that always found a way to blame the person who dared to stand up. But she also imagined the alternative quietly accepting the voucher, sitting in a cramped seat in premium economy, pretending nothing had happened. The thought of that burned hotter than the critics ever could. Her mind drifted to her employees' dozens of young analysts, data scientists, project managers who looked to her not just for leadership, but for an example. She thought of Terrence, fresh out of college, who had once asked her nervously during a meeting, "Were you scared? You know, back then, when you stood up in that boardroom." She had told him the truth, not scared, just tired. That truth pressed against her chest now, demanding recognition. She was tired. tired of being polite in the face of insult, tired of shrinking herself so others could feel comfortable, tired of the endless, grinding requirement to justify her presence. But tired didn't mean powerless. Elena placed her phone face down on her lap and leaned forward slightly. She watched the last few passengers board, the jet bridge filling with movement. She imagined the man in the cargo shorts sliding into her seat, buckling in, sipping his free champagne. The image twisted something in her stomach, but it also solidified her resolve. Not this time. She might not step on that plane tonight, but she would make sure this moment carried weight. Not just for herself, but for every person who had ever stood at a counter like this and been told, with words or with looks, that they didn't belong. Elena straightened, smoothing the fabric of her blazer. She would wait, she would watch, and when the time was right, she would act. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her poised, calm, but with eyes that burned steady and unyielding. The breath she had been holding for years was still inside her, but soon, she knew, she would release it not as surrender, but as fire. The boarding door hissed shut with a heavy finality. Elena watched through the glass as the jet bridge pulled away, the plane edging back from the gate. Passengers buckled in, flight attendants armed with polite smiles. Somewhere inside, a man occupied the seat she had chosen, the seat she had paid for. She should have been there settling her tote beneath the seat in front, adjusting the window shade, reviewing her pitch slides one more time. Instead, she sat in the lounge by the wide window, watching what should have been her flight taxi down the runway. The ache was still there, low and steady in her chest, but it was no longer only humiliation. It was purpose. Elena picked up her phone again, turning it over in her hand. The reflection of the overhead lights flickered across the screen. For a moment, she stared at her own face in the glass, composed, calm, but eyes that told the truth of her exhaustion. She scrolled through her contacts and stopped at one name, David Chen. Her thumb hesitated above the call button. A part of her still whispered, "Maybe let this one go. You're tired. You need to be in San Francisco tomorrow. Don't stir a storm when you need clear skies." But another voice, steadier, cut through, if not now. When she pressed the button, the line rang once, twice, then a familiar voice, crisp and confident. "Elena, everything okay?" Her answer was quiet but precise. "David, I need you to pull every compliance file we have on SkyConnect Airlines. Tonight," there was a pause. "The airline, yes, cross-check contracts, review the audits we flagged last quarter, and call an emergency session with the compliance leads. I want it moving within the hour." David didn't ask for details he knew her too well. He only asked, "Do I need to know what happened?" "You'll know soon enough," she said, her voice low but firm. Another pause, then his answer was clipped, efficient. "Understood. I'll start now." Elena ended the call. She set the phone on the armrest and exhaled slowly. The sound of the engines outside grew distant as the plane accelerated, lifted, and disappeared into the horizon. She wasn't on it, but she didn't feel left behind. She felt the first flicker of something else control. Her laptop slid smoothly out of her tote. Within minutes, she was inside her firm's secure portal, her fingers moving with practice speed. Emails flew, alerts triggered, systems aligned. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't arguing, she wasn't demanding attention at a gate. She was doing what she did best, activating the machinery of accountability. Across the country, In offices lit by fluorescent light, her team would soon be gathering Sophia Martinez, sharp and unflinching, ready to dissect operations, Malik Johnson, eyes scanning code and data, tracing digital trails others thought invisible. Together, they would map the story SkyConnect wanted buried. Elena glanced at the water bottle on the table beside her. She picked it up, turned it slowly in her hand, and thought again of the young woman who had wordlessly placed it there. That small gesture had steadied her more than she could admit. It reminded her she wasn't alone in this. A group of flight attendants passed through the lounge, chatting lightly, unaware of the decision that had just been set in motion. Businessmen hunched over laptops, scrolling through spreadsheets, oblivious to the shift in air. To them, she was just another traveler with a missed flight. But, in truth, she had already turned the gate's humiliation into the opening line of a much larger story. Elena leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the horizon where the plane had vanished. For years, she had been told to contain herself, to move past moments like this quietly, and she had too many times. But tonight would be different, she whispered to herself, almost like a vow. I'll wait here. But I'm not going anywhere. The hum of the airport carried on announcements, footsteps, rolling bags. But for Elena, the noise had faded. All she heard was the clarity of her own decision. What they had dismissed as inconvenience would soon become evidence. What they had brushed aside as policy would soon become accountability. She wasn't chasing a seat anymore. She was chasing something far bigger. The lounge was quiet, almost too quiet. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the aircraft she was supposed to be on drifted across the runway, pausing briefly before its engines roared to life. The sound was muffled by the thick glass, but Elena still felt the vibration in her chest. She sat with her laptop closed now, her hands resting on top of it. The boarding pass was still in her pocket. The thin paper that had started this entire confrontation, she pulled it out, smoothed the crease where Ryan Miller's fingers had bent it, and stared at the bold print Seat 2A. The number burned into her seat. But that plane was already rising, wheels tucked neatly beneath its body, climbing into the fading blue sky. She watched as it tilted, grew smaller, and vanished into a cloud bank. For a moment, she felt the sting of lost time lost, momentum lost, the simple convenience of arriving in San Francisco tonight instead of tomorrow. But layered beneath the sting was something else, a strange calm. They had left without her, but they had not silenced her. Elena leaned back into the leather chair. Around her, other travelers sipped coffee, clicked through emails, or scrolled endlessly on their phones. None of them knew the storm that had just been set into motion. To them, she was only another passenger with a missed connection. Her mind was far from this lounge. It was already racing ahead to the calls David Chen would make, the files Sophia Martinez would begin pulling, the data Malik Johnson would soon uncover. She trusted them. She had built her team for moments exactly like this, not predictable, not scheduled, but moments when the truth demanded to be brought into the light. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years telling clients that systems only protected what they were designed to protect. And now, sitting here, she was living proof. The system at the gate had not protected her. It had protected itself, its biases, its silent assumptions. Elena rubbed her temple gently, then closed her eyes. Her thoughts drifted to San Francisco, to the investors she was supposed to meet in less than 24 hours. She could still attend, she reminded herself. She would join by video if she had to. But even that thought felt distant compared to what was unfolding here. This was bigger than a meeting, bigger than a partnership. Her phone buzzed again. A message from David Pullen, Contracts Now, found 3 flagged discrepancies already. Sophia and Malik are online. Update soon. She read it twice, then set the phone down. A faint smile touched her lips. Not joy, not satisfaction, but recognition. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who had been told, subtly or directly, "You don't belong here." A lounge attendant walked past, offering a tray of fruit. Elena shook her head politely, then returned to the window. The runway was empty now, the sky wide and pale. She thought of the man in cargo shorts, sipping champagne in 2A. Did he know? Did he even realize that the seat he had slid into so casually had belonged to someone else? Or was it invisible to him? Just another moment where the world bent in his favor without him ever needing to notice. Elena's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. She imagined him relaxing, maybe laughing at something on his tablet, never knowing the humiliation his ease had cost someone else. That thought stung, but it also clarified her resolve. It was never about the seat. It was about what the seat represented. She whispered the words to herself, tasting them like steel on her tongue. Her laptop hummed faintly as she opened it again, the glow of the screen washing across her face. She pulled up her notes for San Francisco, but her eyes blurred across the slides. Instead, she opened a new document and typed a single line, "The system will not change itself." She paused, then added another, "But neither will I back down." Her reflection stared back from the glass wall of the lounge, strong, composed, unyielding. She thought of her employees, of her mother, of that small nod from the young woman with the water bottle. Every detail stacked together, building a truth too heavy to ignore. The lounge's overhead speaker announced the boarding of another flight. Elena didn't move. She wasn't in a hurry anymore. The plane she had paid for was gone, but the fight she was preparing for was only just beginning. Night had settled over Dallas by the time Elena returned to her hotel room. She set her tote down carefully, unzipped her blazer, and slipped off her heels. The quiet felt heavier than usual, not comforting but charged. Her body was tired, yet her mind refused to rest. She opened her laptop again. A Zoom notification blinked. Without hesitation, she clicked Join. 3 faces appeared: David Chen, his tie loosened but eyes sharp behind his glasses; Sophia Martinez, hair pulled back, posture leaning forward with intensity; and Malik Johnson, hoodie up, fingers still flying over a second keyboard out of frame. David spoke first. "We've already found 3 red flags in SkyConnect's compliance reports. 2 involve unresolved employee complaints about gate-level bias. The third," he paused, looking down at his notes. "The third is an internal audit they buried last fall. It warned that ID checks at boarding were inconsistent and carried a high risk of discrimination claims." Elena exhaled slowly, and nothing was done. Sophia shook her head. Not a single policy change, not even retraining. It was signed off, then shelved. They knew, Elena, they knew. For a moment, the call was silent except for Malik's typing. Then he looked up, his voice low. "I've tapped into their HR database through the compliance portal. There are 19 incidents logged in the last 12 months that mention passengers being asked if they belonged in a line. 7 of them use almost the exact same phrasing." Elena's throat tightened. Those words, The same words Ryan Miller had thrown at her. "Are you sure you're in the right line, ma'am?" The phrase echoed in her memory like a wound reopening. David adjusted his glasses. This isn't about a single bad actor. This is systemic. Elena sat back, letting their words sink in. She glanced at the city skyline beyond her window, lights blinking like quiet signals in the dark. She remembered her mother's voice, years ago, telling her, "Elena, you'll walk into rooms where people look at you and see everything except who you really are. Don't let them be right." She blinked the memory away and leaned forward. "We push the audit forward. Full review. No delays." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "That'll put us in direct conflict with SkyConnect's executive team before week's end." Elena's tone didn't waver. "Good. Let's make them uncomfortable. They hired us for transparency. Now they'll get it." Malik grinned faintly, tapping in a few last commands. Then they're about to have the most transparent week of their lives. The call stretched past midnight. Screens flickered with documents, highlighted clauses, time-stamped video stills, and buried memos. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened not of an isolated mistake, but of a culture designed to protect itself. At one point, Sophia's voice softened. "Elena, can I ask, how are you holding up, really?" Elena hesitated. She was used to projecting strength, calm, composure, but this was her team, her people. They deserved more than the mask. "I'm not scared," she said quietly. "I'm tired. Tired of proving I belong in spaces I've already earned. Tired of swallowing moments like today just to keep moving forward." But tonight, she paused, her eyes steady on the camera. "Tonight, I don't feel tired. Tonight, I feel ready." David nodded firmly. "Then so are we." When the call ended, it was nearly 2 a.m. Elena closed her laptop and sat in the dark. For the first time all day, she allowed herself a long, unguarded sigh. Her reflection in the window looked older, more vulnerable. Yet beneath the fatigue, a fire had caught. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a text from Malik. "Check your email." "Found something bigger?" She opened the attachment. It was an internal memo from a district manager at Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, dated nearly a year earlier. The subject line read, "Boarding procedures, risk assessment." The memo detailed specific complaints of passengers of color being singled out for extra checks at boarding gates. The manager had recommended immediate action, including staff retraining and revised oversight protocols. The note at the bottom, written by a SkyConnect executive, chilled her file acknowledged. "No immediate action required. Monitor for PR risk." Elena felt her jaw tighten. Monitor for PR risk. Not monitor for fairness. Not monitor for equity. Just PR. She pushed away from the desk and paced the room. For years, she had told clients that words revealed priorities more than any policy. And here, in black and white, SkyConnect had chosen appearances over people. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Sophia. "It's leaking online. Someone recorded the gate incident yesterday. The clip is spreading." Elena froze. She clicked the link Sophia sent. The video was shaky, recorded from a phone at waist level, but the audio was clear. Ryan Miller's voice rang out. "You sure you're in the right line, ma'am?" Then Elena's own calm reply. Then, the moment he waved the man in cargo shorts through without a single check, the clip ended with her being told to step aside. Elena's chest ached, not from shame, but from recognition. The internet didn't need commentary. The raw footage spoke for itself. The comments below the video scrolled endlessly. Some were furious, some heartbroken, many sharing stories of their own humiliations at airports, offices, stores, thousands of voices echoing one truth. This isn't rare. This is every day. For the first time, Elena realized this fight had already left her hands. It wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been dismissed with a quiet, cutting phrase. She whispered to the empty room. Then, let's make it count. She sat back at her desk, pulled a fresh notepad close, and began outlining next steps. Legal escalation, press strategy, employee testimony. She wouldn't seek revenge, but she wouldn't settle for silence either. The system had cracked open. Now, it was time to break it wide enough for change to finally slip through. By mid-morning, Elena's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She had silenced notifications twice, but each time the screen lit up with more messages, friends forwarding links, journalists asking for comment, strangers offering solidarity. The video had gone viral overnight. The clip wasn't polished or edited, just raw footage, Ryan Miller's flat voice, the casual dismissal, the man in cargo shorts being waved through, then Elena's quiet insistence, her refusal to raise her voice even as the gate closed around her. On Twitter, the hashtag was climbing, seat for Elena. One user wrote, "She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just stood her ground. And they still erased her. This is every black traveler's story." Another, "It's not about the seat. It's about the message you don't belong." We all know that message. We've all felt it. Within hours, thousands of people had shared their own stories, missed flights, humiliating questions, random searches. Elena scrolled through them slowly, her heart heavy and yet strangely lifted. She wasn't alone, and that mattered. Across the country, in SkyConnect's headquarters, the mood was very different. The CEO, Thomas Gray, stood at the head of a long mahogany table, voice clipped and impatient. "Why am I finding out about this from Twitter?" he snapped, slapping a printed screenshot of the viral video onto the table. Executives shifted uncomfortably. A PR director cleared his throat. "We were monitoring the situation, sir. Our team believed it was an isolated incident." Isolated Gray's voice rose. "Do you see the numbers? 500,000 views in 4 hours. Every comment is accusing us of discrimination. We've had calls from investors already. This is not isolated. This is a crisis." Silence pressed over the room. No one dared speak. Finally, the chief operating officer muttered, "What do we do?" The PR director shuffled his notes. "We can release a statement." "Apologize for the inconvenience." Gray cut him off with a glare. "Don't say inconvenience. Not again. That word is poison right now." He ran a hand over his forehead. "Pacing. We need containment. Fast. In Dallas." Elena watched from her hotel room as SkyConnect's first statement hit the news feeds. "We are aware of the incident involving Ms. Elena Roberts. We are conducting an internal review of our boarding procedures and sincerely apologize for the distress caused." She read the words twice. Distress caused, not discrimination, not bias, distress. She closed her eyes briefly. They still didn't get it. Or maybe they did and couldn't admit it. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Sophia. "They're dodging the word," Sophia said without preamble. "Distress. That's not accountability. That's PR spin." Elena's voice stayed calm. "Good. Let them underestimate me. It makes the truth land harder." David's voice joined in on speaker. Investors are nervous. I've already had 3 calls forwarded. If this keeps trending, they'll have no choice but to act. Malik chimed in, and we're not done. I've cross-referenced their complaint files with boarding records. Patterns are everywhere. This isn't a one-off. It's a system. Elena stood by the window, looking out at the endless flow of planes. Somewhere out there, another black traveler was probably being asked if they belonged. She thought of them faces she'd never see, stories she'd never hear. This isn't about me anymore, she said quietly. It never was. We have to make sure this moment doesn't get swept away in apologies and vouchers. We need change. Later that day, she walked into Equinox's conference room back in Oakland. Her team was already gathered, junior analysts, interns, engineers. People looked up as she entered, some tired, some buzzing with adrenaline. She didn't use a mic. She didn't need one. This was never about a seat. She began, her voice steady. It was about a look, a tone, a decision made before I even opened my mouth. It was about being told I didn't belong where I'd already earned my place. The room was silent, everyone leaning forward. And here's the truth, I'm not special. This happens every day, to people with no lawyers, no platforms, no LinkedIn profiles. Most of them walk away, because it's exhausting to fight every time. She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. But this time, we won't walk away. We'll hold them accountable, not just for me, but for everyone. Applause broke out, not rehearsed, not polite, but sharp and urgent. People were moved, and Elena saw it. She felt it. That night, CNN ran a headline, "Black CEO Denied First-Class Seat. Airline Faces Backlash." Commentators debated. Hashtags grew. And by midnight, Seat 4 Elena had passed 2 million mentions. SkyConnect's board called an emergency meeting. They debated firing low-level staff, offering Elena free flights for life, anything to make the story disappear. But the evidence her team had already filed, those 19 incidents, the buried memo was waiting in their inboxes. There was no disappearing this time, and for Elena, that was the point. Elena woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. The clock read 5:42 a.m. She rubbed her eyes, reached for the device, and saw a single notification that made her sit upright. Anonymous email subject. You don't know me, but I used to work at SkyConnect. Her heart ticked faster as she tapped it open. The message was short, almost abrupt. I saw the video. I believe you. I was a district manager until last year. We reported discriminatory practices at gates across 3 airports. The reports were buried. I have copies. If you're serious about accountability, I'll share them. At the bottom was a link to a secure folder. Elena exhaled, staring at the screen. A whistleblower. Someone on the inside who had tried and failed to change the system. Now, they were trusting her to carry the truth further. She clicked the link cautiously. Dozens of documents appeared, internal memos, HR complaints, even screenshots of emails between executives. She skimmed one at random, passenger questioned repeatedly despite valid boarding pass. Recommended follow-up staff training, action deferred. Another gate agents disproportionately reassigning seats of minority passengers under operational adjustments. The language was clinical, but the pattern was unmistakable. Her phone buzzed again, this time. Sophia, already awake. You've seen it too, Sophia asked breathlessly. Yes, Elena replied. Her voice was calm, but her hand tightened around the phone. This isn't just negligence, it's willful. They had the data. They chose silence. David joined the call a few minutes later. Voice steady. If these documents are verified, it's not just bad optics. It's liability, serious liability, class action territory. Malik cut in, excitement in his tone. I can authenticate the metadata, dates, file origins, all of it. If these are legit, SkyConnect won't be able to deny it. Elena paced the room, the carpet muffling her steps. She thought about the risks. A whistleblower could change everything, but also expose her team to retaliation if they weren't careful. She paused at the window, watching the first streaks of dawn light across Dallas. In the stillness, she whispered to herself, "Don't let fear decide this." "All right," she said aloud. "We verify. We protect the source. And when the time is right, we release it." By mid-morning, the documents were confirmed. Malik had traced their digital fingerprints to internal SkyConnect servers. The evidence was airtight. Meanwhile, the media storm grew louder. CNN aired panel discussions. MSNBC ran segments with civil rights leaders calling the incident a symptom of systemic rot. Social media platforms overflowed with new hashtags, Borden bias and Das Flyfair. At SkyConnect headquarters, panic escalated. Thomas Gray slammed his fist on the boardroom table. "Who leaked these reports?" His voice thundered. Executives exchanged nervous glances. The general counsel spoke softly. "We can't confirm, sir, but the documents circulating appear authentic." Gray's face reddened. "We had a strategy. Apologize. Move on. Now we're looking at federal scrutiny. Investors are calling for my head." Back in Oakland, Elena gathered her team in the conference room. The whistleblower documents lay printed on the table, each page a reminder of choices made to protect image over integrity. She looked around the room, David's measured calm, Sophia's fierce energy, Malik's sharp focus. Then her eyes fell on the younger staffers, analysts barely out of college, watching her with a mix of fear and admiration. "This is the moment," Elena said quietly. "The difference between a scandal that fades and a reckoning that lasts." Sophia leaned forward. "Then we take it public. All of it." David hesitated. "We need to be smart. Timing matters. If we release too soon, SkyConnect spins it as stolen files. If we wait too long, they bury us in lawsuits." Malik tapped the table. "We have leverage now, but leverage is only power if you use it." Elena sat in silence for a long beat. Inside, her thoughts churned. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on her career, her company, her people. She thought about her mother, who had cleaned offices long past midnight so Elena could study. She thought about the woman who had quietly handed her a bottle of water at the gate. Silent solidarity. This fight was no longer hers alone. "We release," Elena said finally, "not for vengeance, for truth. We protect the source, we show the patterns, and we let the world see what SkyConnect tried to hide." The decision settled over the room like a charge of electricity. Heads nodded, determination igniting in their eyes. That evening, Equinox Compliance Group issued a public statement. "We have obtained internal documents confirming systemic discriminatory practices at SkyConnect Airlines. These practices were reported internally and ignored. We stand with those silenced, and we demand accountability. The evidence is now public. Within an hour, major news outlets had the files. Anchors read excerpts live on air. Passengers across the country began posting their own Borden stories. some years old, others from last week. The collective narrative swelled. This wasn't about one CEO denied her seat. It was about a pattern as wide as the airline's routes back at SkyConnect. Thomas Gray stared at the television in disbelief. His empire was unraveling in real time. And for Elena, watching quietly from her office, there was no triumph in her eyes, only resolve. She whispered again to herself, the same words she had written days earlier. The system won't change itself, but neither will I back down. By Friday morning, the storm had reached Washington. News anchors spoke in measured tones, their graphics filled with screenshots of leaked memos. SkyConnect's corporate logo flashing beside bold words, systemic bias allegations. Civil rights groups called for investigations. Senators tweeted demands for hearings. The Department of Transportation confirmed it had opened a formal inquiry. Investors, meanwhile, were restless. Calls poured into SkyConnect's board offices, some demanding resignations, others threatening to pull capital if action wasn't swift. At headquarters, Thomas Gray sat slouched in his chair, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. "This is spiraling," he muttered, staring at the glowing headlines on the wall screen. "We need a scapegoat." One executive cleared his throat. "We could terminate the gate agent, Ryan Miller. He's expendable." Gray snapped his head up. "And you think firing one employee erases 19 incidents? The buried memo, the video everyone's seen 1,000 times." He shoved the papers off the table. "This is bigger than him. They want blood, and they're circling me across the country." Elena sat in her Oakland office, sipping coffee she had barely tasted. The city was alive outside her window, but her mind was fixed on the quiet intensity inside her team's conference room. David Chen laid out the latest updates. "The DOT wants to speak with you. They've asked if Equinox would be willing to provide context from the audit. You'd be testifying, essentially." Sophia Martinez leaned forward. "The board at SkyConnect has scheduled an emergency session. Gray's grip is slipping. If you push now, you can force structural change, not just a press apology." Elena set her cup down gently. Her reflection in the glass table stared back at her tired eyes, but steady. "I didn't set out to fight $1 billion airline," she said softly. "I just wanted to get on a plane. And yet, here we are." Malik Johnson looked up from his laptop, where social media streams flashed by in rapid succession. "People believe in you, Elena. It's not just your seat anymore. It's theirs, too. If you don't step forward, they'll feel abandoned." The words lingered. They pressed against the quiet corner of her mind where doubt lived. Would stepping forward make her a symbol instead of a leader? Would it take away her privacy forever? She thought of her mother's last message. "Proud of you always." The fear softened. Duty remained. "Set up the call with the dot," Elena said at last, "and get me the SkyConnect board. If Gray wants to hide behind spin, then I'll say the truth directly to the people who sign his checks." Her team nodded. The air felt electric, charged with inevitability. That evening, a headline flashed across major outlets: SkyConnect CEO Thomas Gray to face emergency board review amid discrimination scandal. Inside a dim hotel suite in Dallas, Gray sat with 2 advisors. His hands trembled slightly as he poured a drink. "They're going to hang me," he whispered. "The board, the investors, the regulators, all because of one passenger." One advisor shifted uneasily. "Not just one passenger, a CEO, a black woman." CEO with a platform and proof? That's different. Gray scowled, but deep down he knew it was true. He had underestimated her. They all had. Back in Oakland, Elena prepared her notes for the upcoming call. She wrote in careful bullet points systemic failures, buried warnings, lived experience. But, between the lines, she scribbled reminders only she would see. Stay calm. Stay human. Don't let anger drown the message. As she closed her notebook, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. Elena Roberts. The voice was clipped, professional. This is the Secretary's office. The Department of Transportation would like to schedule you for testimony early next week. We believe your perspective is critical. Elena's pulse quickened. Of course, I'll be ready. She ended the call and sat in silence. The weight was real now. She wasn't just carrying her own story. She was carrying everyone's. Her chest tightened briefly, a mix of fear and determination. She whispered to herself, the same phrase that had anchored her all week. The system won't change itself, but neither will I back down. And with that, she knew. The next step wasn't just about an airline. It was about rewriting the rules of belonging in the skies and beyond. The boardroom of SkyConnect Airlines in Dallas was colder than Elena expected. The air conditioning hummed, the glass walls gleamed, and along the polished oak table sat 12 executives whose faces carried the weariness of sleepless nights. At the head of the table, Thomas Gray looked smaller than his reputation. His jaw was set, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. He had been fighting for his career all week, and the battle was slipping through his fingers. Elena entered with David Chen at her side, Sophia Martinez following, and Malik Johnson carrying a slim folder of authenticated documents. She wore no bright colors, no designer accents, just a plain navy suit, simple earrings, and the quiet dignity that had unsettled them more than anger ever could. The room fell silent as she sat. One board member cleared her throat. Ms. Roberts, thank you for joining us. We understand you have concerns. Elena's eyes moved across the table, steady and unflinching. Concerns. Her voice was calm, measured. What I have is evidence. Evidence of a system that has failed passengers of color repeatedly. While your leadership looked the other way, David slid the folder forward. Inside were the whistleblower memos, the buried audits, the 19 unresolved complaints. The pages fanned out like indictments, each one impossible to ignore. Gray shifted uncomfortably. We've already acknowledged the incident. Elena cut him off, her tone still soft but sharp enough to slice through the room. No. You acknowledged distress, not discrimination, not bias. Distress, as if my dignity were a minor inconvenience on par with a delayed snack cart. A murmur rippled around the table. One executive avoided her gaze. Another scribbled notes furiously. Sophia leaned forward, her voice firm. Equinox Compliance has authenticated these records. They prove SkyConnect received internal warnings and chose not to act. This isn't negligence, it's systemic disregard, Malik added, and the public knows it. Every data point here lines up with patterns we've exposed. You can't bury it anymore. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the AC filled the silence. Finally, Gray tried again. Look, we regret what happened to you, Ms. Roberts, but surely you don't expect Elena's hand pressed gently on the table, stopping him. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping just enough to force everyone to listen. "I don't want coupons, I don't want free flights, and I don't want a staged apology tour. What I expect, what the public expects, is accountability, real, structural change, because this was never just about me. It was about every traveler who has ever been told, with words or with silence, that they don't belong." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. A board member, an older woman with silver hair, cleared her throat. "What, specifically, are you demanding?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Independent oversight, mandatory bias training tied to employee evaluations, a transparent reporting system that bypasses chain of command, so complaints can't be buried, and a chief diversity officer with the authority to override operational decisions in real time," David added crisply, "all codified under binding compliance agreements, with external audits monitored quarterly." The silver-haired board member nodded slowly, as though recognizing inevitability. Gray bristled. "You can't dictate how we run our airline." Elena's gaze locked on him, not with fury, but with a calm that unsettled him more than rage ever could. "I'm not dictating. I'm holding you accountable. You wanted Equinox name on your diversity banners. Now you'll have Equinox's standards in your operations, or you'll lose contracts, investors, and customers who no longer trust you." Silence. The truth was undeniable. Outside the glass, cameras already swarmed the lobby. Inside, investors were watching from afar, their patience evaporating by the hour. The board huddled in whispers, Gray's shoulders slumped, his power evaporating in plain sight. Finally, the chairwoman spoke. "Ms. Roberts, we agree to your terms. An external compliance framework will be adopted immediately. A new chief diversity officer will be appointed, and independent audits will begin next quarter under Equinox supervision." Elena inclined her head slightly. "That's a start." Gray's voice cracked as he tried to recover. "You're making a spectacle of us." Elena's eyes softened, but her words were unyielding. "No, I'm giving you a chance to be better than the spectacle you created for yourselves." She stood, signaling the meeting was done. Her team gathered their materials. The executives avoided her gaze, except for the silver-haired woman, who offered the smallest of nods, a gesture that felt like both apology and gratitude. As Elena walked out of the boardroom, the hallway erupted with the click of cameras and the calls of reporters. Questions flew through the air. "Mayor Roberts, do you consider this a victory? Do you trust SkyConnect to follow through?" She paused only once, answering in the same calm tone she had carried all along. "This isn't about victory. It's about dignity, and dignity isn't negotiable." With that, she walked on, her team beside her, the storm behind her, and the path forward clear. The story of Elena Roberts reminds us that dignity is not a luxury. It is a birthright. Too often, people are judged not by their abilities or their character, but by assumptions shaped long before they speak. Elena's experience at the boarding gate shows how subtle moments of bias can carry the weight of a lifetime of exclusion. But her response also shows us something else, the power of choice. Instead of anger, she chose calm. Instead of silence, she chose accountability. And by standing her ground with dignity, she opened the door for thousands of others to be heard. For those of us watching, especially those who have lived long enough to feel the sting of being overlooked, the lesson is clear. Systems don't change by themselves. They change when ordinary people refuse to shrink. when they demand better, not just for themselves, but for the next person in line. In our families, our workplaces, our communities, we all face moments where the easy path is silence. Elena's story calls us to remember respect isn't given freely. It is affirmed, defended, and sometimes reclaimed. And in choosing to speak, we plant seeds of hope for generations that follow. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. Stories like Elena's matter because they remind us of our shared humanity and our shared responsibility to stand against injustice. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to light. Together, we can keep these conversations alive.